The cafe was nearly empty when Marcus watched her gather her things. 3 months of pursuit dinners, late-night conversations, moments he'd replayed endlessly, and now this. Sarah pushed her chair back, the screech against tile cutting through the silence between them. "I need space," she said, not meeting his eyes. "This isn't working for me." He felt his throat tighten, that familiar panic rising. Every instinct screamed to reach across the table, to explain himself better, to promise he'd change whatever needed changing. His hand moved forward involuntarily before he caught himself. Something in that moment crystallized a recognition that begging would seal his fate. He withdrew his hand, leaned back instead, and did something that felt completely unnatural. He smiled, not broadly, not desperately, just a slight upturn at the corner of his mouth. "Okay," he said simply. The confusion that flickered across her face lasted only a second, but he saw it. She'd expected resistance, maybe even wanted it on some level. What she got was acceptance, almost indifference. He stood, placed money on the table for both their coffees, and walked out without looking back. His heart hammered against his ribs the entire way to his car, but he didn't turn around. What happened over the next 6 weeks defies everything modern dating advice tells you. Sarah didn't just come back, she pursued with an intensity that reversed their entire dynamic. The woman who needed space suddenly couldn't handle his absence. The rejection that should have ended everything became the catalyst for a completely transformed relationship. This wasn't luck, manipulation, or game playing. This was the application of a principle so powerful that Niccolo Machiavelli understood it 5 centuries ago. A principle that governs not just romantic dynamics, but human desire itself. When you understand what actually happened in that cafe, when you grasp the psychology beneath the surface, you hold a key that most men never discover. They spend their lives chasing, convincing, pursuing, never understanding why their intensity creates the opposite of what they want. They believe passion requires persistence, that love demands sacrifice of dignity, that showing how much you care demonstrates value. They're wrong on every count, and their romantic lives suffer endlessly because of it. The truth cuts against everything you've been taught about relationships. From childhood, men absorb the message that love requires pursuit, that the hero fights for the princess, that dedication means never giving up. Hollywood sells this fantasy relentlessly. The grand gesture, the airport chase, the passionate declaration that finally breaks through resistance. These narratives embed themselves deep in male psychology, creating a template for behavior that systematically undermines attraction. When she pulls away, every fiber of your being insists you must pull harder. When she creates distance, your instinct demands you close it. When she shows disinterest, you're programmed to demonstrate more interest to compensate. This approach fails not because you lack sincerity or effort, but because it reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of desire itself. Machiavelli never wrote a dating manual, but his observations on power, human nature, and strategic interaction contain more wisdom about attraction than 1,000 relationship books combined. In The Prince, he knows something crucial about human psychology. People value most what they must work to obtain, what comes easily, what's always available. What requires no effort to keep this holds no power over the human heart. Machiavelli understood that desire isn't created through availability or demonstration of worth. It's generated through scarcity, uncertainty, and the fear of loss. When Sarah pushed Marcus away, she expected a predictable response, one that would confirm her decision and validate her need for space. She expected pursuit because pursuit is what every man before him had offered. His acceptance shattered that expectation entirely. Suddenly, she faced something unfamiliar, a man who didn't crumble when she withdrew her attention, who didn't negotiate for scraps of affection, whose value didn't seem dependent on her validation. This created a psychological earthquake. Here's what most men fail to understand about rejection. When a woman pushes you away, she's not necessarily testing you, though sometimes that's part of it. More often, she's genuinely responding to something she feels. A lack of attraction, or overwhelming intensity, or simple uncertainty. But the crucial point is this: her current emotional state isn't permanent. It's a snapshot, not a verdict. Feelings fluctuate, circumstances change, perceptions shift. The man who accepts rejection as immutable truth hands over all his power in that moment. He allows her temporary state to become permanent reality through his response. The man who understands fluidity maintains possibility through strategic withdrawal. This isn't about manipulation or playing games. It's about recognizing that desperate pursuit in the face of rejection accomplishes exactly nothing except confirming her decision to pull away. You cannot convince someone to desire you through logical argument or emotional pleading. Desire doesn't respond to reason. It responds to stimulus, to absence, to the activation of psychological mechanisms that operate below conscious awareness. When Marcus walked out of that cafe without protest or negotiation, he triggered something primal in Sarah's psychology. For 3 months, she'd held absolute power in their dynamic. She controlled the pace, the emotional temperature, the degree of intimacy. His pursuit had been consistent, his interest obvious, his availability assured. This created a comfortable certainty for her. She could step toward him or away from him without real consequence because he'd always be there, always ready to receive her whenever she decided to return. His acceptance of her rejection destroyed that certainty instantly. Suddenly, the ground beneath her shifted. The man who'd orbited around her for months just walked away without trying to change her mind. This created doubt where there'd been certainty, scarcity where there'd been abundance, and most critically, it activated her ego in a completely new way. Because here's what happens in the female psyche when a man she's rejected doesn't chase. She begins to question her own assessment. If he's walking away this easily, maybe she was wrong about his level of interest. If he's not fighting for her, maybe she wasn't as important to him as she thought. If he's accepting this so calmly, maybe he has other options she didn't know about. These thoughts gnaw at the ego, creating discomfort that grows with each day of silence. The withdrawal strategy works not because women want what they can't have, that's a simplistic explanation, but because absence forces re-evaluation. When you're constantly present, constantly available, constantly demonstrating interest, she has no reason to reconsider her position. Your pursuit confirms everything she already believes about the dynamic. But when you withdraw, when you stop providing that steady stream of attention and validation, you create space for doubt to enter. She starts remembering the good moments differently. The qualities that seemed merely adequate before begin to shine brighter in hindsight. Other men she's dating or considering suddenly seem less appealing by comparison. This happens because the human mind assigns greater value to what is lost than to what it has. Psychologists call this loss aversion, and is one of the most powerful forces in human decision-making. People will work harder to avoid losing something than to gain something of equal value. When you pursue a woman who's rejected you, you're positioning yourself as a potential gain. When you withdraw, you become a potential loss. The psychological weight is completely different. Marcus didn't contact Sarah for 6 weeks. No texts, no social media engagement, no manufactured run-ins at places he knew she'd be. This wasn't a tactic with a timeline. He didn't mark off days on a calendar waiting for her to break. He genuinely shifted his focus elsewhere, invested in other areas of his life, dated other women. This authentic redirection of energy is critical. The withdrawal must be real, not performed. Women have extraordinarily sensitive bullshit detectors, especially regarding male behavior. If you're obviously waiting for her to come back, if your absence is clearly strategic and temporary, the power of the withdrawal collapses. She can sense the difference between a man who's genuinely moved on and a man who's pretending to move on while secretly obsessing. The former creates attraction, the latter creates pity or contempt. During those 6 weeks, Sarah's internal experience underwent a transformation. The first week brought relief she'd wanted space, and now she had it. The second week brought curiosity. She wondered if he'd reach out, if he was thinking about her. The third week brought mild concern. His silence seemed absolute, genuine, perhaps too genuine. By the fourth week, doubt had fully set in. Had she made a mistake? Had she pushed away something valuable? By the sixth week, she was the one initiating contact, suggesting they talk, eventually admitting she'd been confused about what she wanted. This pattern repeats itself across countless situations because it's rooted in fundamental human psychology, not in tricks or manipulation. Machiavelli's insights about power apply directly to romantic dynamics because romance is a form of power exchange. The person who cares less, who needs the relationship less, who can walk away more easily, this person holds the power. Not because power in relationships is desirable as an end in itself, but because the balance of power directly affects attraction. Women are attracted to men who occupy higher status, who demonstrate strength, who cannot be easily controlled or manipulated. These preferences aren't cultural conditioning or societal programming, they're evolutionary adaptations selected over hundreds of thousands of years. A man who collapses when she pulls away demonstrates low status, weakness, and excessive emotional investment. A man who accepts her decision calmly and redirects his energy elsewhere demonstrates the opposite. He signals that his emotional stability doesn't depend on her validation, that his life has meaning and purpose beyond any single relationship, that he has options and won't settle for someone ambivalent about him. The transformation in Sarah's behavior after she reinitiated contact was striking, where before she'd been lukewarm, setting boundaries, pulling back when he moved forward, now she was the one pursuing. She texted more frequently, suggested plans, showed genuine interest in his life, and displayed an enthusiasm that had been completely absent during their first 3 months. What changed? Not Marcus fundamentally, he was the same person with the same qualities. What changed was her perception of him, her assessment of his value, her fear of losing access to him. The rejection turned desire wasn't magic. It was the predictable result of understanding and applying psychological principles that govern human attraction. When you chase someone who's pulling away, you appear desperate regardless of your actual circumstances. Desperation reads as low value. When you accept the rejection and move on, you appear abundant regardless of your actual circumstances. Abundance reads as high value. These perceptions shape everything that follows. But here's where most men who learn this principle go wrong. They treat it as a technique, a move in a game, a manipulation to deploy when needed. They withdraw strategically while remaining emotionally invested, counting days until she comes back, analyzing every small sign that she might be reconsidering. This approach fails because it's fundamentally reactive. You're still allowing her emotional state to control your behavior, just in a different way. True power in this dynamic comes from genuine outcome independence, the ability to release the outcome entirely, to truly accept that she might never come back, and to rebuild your life in a way that makes her return optional rather than necessary. This is what Machiavelli understood about power that most people miss. Real power isn't about controlling others. It's about controlling yourself so completely that others cannot control you. When you genuinely don't need her validation or presence to feel whole, when you've built a life so fulfilling that her rejection becomes merely unfortunate rather than devastating, you've achieved true outcome independence. And paradoxically, this is precisely the state that makes you most attractive. The practical application of this requires emotional discipline that most men never develop. When she pulls away, every instinct screams to fight for the connection. Your mind generates countless justifications for pursuit. Maybe she's testing you. Maybe she needs you to prove your commitment. Maybe one more conversation would clarify things. Maybe she's confused and needs your help seeing clearly. These rationalizations serve only one purpose: protecting your ego from accepting rejection. The disciplined response is completely different. You acknowledge her stated position, you thank her for her honesty, and you genuinely release the outcome. You don't send sporadic texts checking in. You don't like her social media posts hoping she'll notice. You don't manufacture reasons to contact her. You shift your energy completely toward other areas of life that deserve your attention. This isn't a 90-day program after which you expect results. This is a fundamental reorientation of how you approach relationships and your own value. You become the kind of man for whom rejection from any single woman, no matter how desirable, doesn't shake your foundation. When you embody this genuinely, something remarkable happens beyond any individual relationship. You become more attractive to women generally because you are no longer operating from neediness or scarcity. Women sense this shift immediately. The man who doesn't need their validation, who has genuine abundance in his life, who treats their interest as welcome but not necessary, this man stands out dramatically from the vast majority of men they encounter. Most men communicate neediness in subtle ways. They're too available, too eager to help, too willing to rearrange their lives, too invested too quickly. They seek validation through female attention, and their neediness permeates their behavior. The man who's genuinely abundant doesn't need to perform abundance. It shows in how he sets boundaries, maintains his own priorities, and doesn't compromise his standards out of fear of losing options. This attractive quality isn't something you can fake consistently. It requires internal work, building a life you genuinely value, developing skills and relationships and purposes that fulfill you independent of romantic success. The Machiavellian approach to rejection isn't about being cold or uncaring. It's about understanding that your response to rejection determines whether it becomes permanent. The man who accepts rejection with grace and moves forward demonstrates strength, emotional maturity, and self-respect. These qualities are inherently attractive. The man who pursues desperately demonstrates weakness, emotional instability, and lack of options. These qualities repel attraction. You get to choose which man you'll be in that moment when she pushes you away. Everything that follows flows from that choice. Marcus made the choice that preserved his dignity and, as it happened, reversed the dynamic entirely. But even if Sarah had never come back, his response would have been correct because it positioned him to move forward rather than remain stuck in a loop of rejection and pursuit. The deepest insight here transcends any individual situation. When you understand that you cannot negotiate genuine desire, that attraction doesn't respond to logical argument or emotional pleading, that people value what they fear losing rather than what they are certain they can keep, you've grasped something essential about human nature. This knowledge frees you from the exhausting cycle of trying to convince someone to want you. Instead, you present yourself authentically, invest in those who reciprocate your interest, and release those who don't. Not as a tactic to make them come back, but as a recognition of your own value and a refusal to accept crumbs of affection from someone ambivalent about you. This self-respect is the foundation of attractive masculine energy. When you embody it consistently, rejection stops feeling like failure and starts feeling like efficient filtering. Some women won't be attracted to you regardless of what you do. This isn't a reflection of your worth. It's simply reality. The women who are attracted to you deserve your focus and energy. The women who aren't should be released immediately and completely. The pattern is clear once you see it. Pursuit in the face of rejection lowers your value in her eyes. Acceptance and withdrawal preserves it and often increases it. The mechanism is psychological, rooted in how humans assess value and experience desire. You can resist this reality, insisting that real love should work differently, that genuine connection should overcome these dynamics. Or you can accept how attraction actually functions and adjust your behavior accordingly. Machiavelli succeeded because he described the world as it is, not as people wished it to be. The same approach applies to understanding romantic dynamics. Describe them accurately, understand the mechanisms beneath the surface, and act in accordance with reality rather than comforting fictions. This is how rejection transforms into desire, not through alchemy or magic, but through the systematic application of psychological principles that have governed human interaction since long before Machiavelli observed them. Now you hold this knowledge. What you do with it determines the entire trajectory of your romantic life. You can continue pursuing women who pull away, hoping that this time your intensity will break through their resistance. Or you can recognize the pattern, understand the psychology, and become the man who doesn't need to chase because his value is evident in his willingness to walk away from those who don't recognize it. The choice is yours, but the consequences are predictable. One path leads to repeated rejection and damaged self-esteem. The other leads to genuine abundance and attraction from women who see your value clearly. Choose wisely. If this framework shifted something in how you view relationships and attraction, if you recognize yourself in Marcus's story or felt the weight of understanding settle over you, don't let this moment pass without action. Subscribe to this channel because we're dismantling every comfortable lie you've been told about dating, success, and masculine power. We're going deeper than surface level tactics into the psychological warfare that governs every human interaction. Hit that like button if you're tired of being the man who chases and ready to become the man who's chased. Drop a comment sharing your experience. Have you ever walked away from a woman only to have her come back with renewed interest? Your story might be exactly what another man needs to hear to change his entire approach. Share this video with any man stuck in the cycle of pursuit and rejection. Any friend who's currently negotiating for scraps of affection from someone who doesn't see his value. This information changes lives, but only if it reaches the men who need it most. The algorithm rewards engagement, so every like, comment, and share pushes this message to more men who are suffering unnecessarily because they don't understand these principles. Be part of that change. Take action now, and I'll see you in the next video where we're breaking down the next Machiavellian principle that separates men who lead from men who follow.